Hello and welcome back. In the first session, I explained how Confucianism became the dominant worldview during the Joseon dynasty, and I presented examples of how this was manifested in the location and naming of key royal sites, including Gyeongbokgung Palace, Jongmyo Shrine, and Sadik Altar in the capital city of Hanyang, as Seoul was then known by. In the second session, I explained how the adherence to Confucian worldviews shaped the ways in which Joseon people dressed and the objects they used. In this session, we will consider the ways in which the observance of state-sponsored rites led to the production of various works of art that were made to record the events, celebrate the rulership, and in essence, enable the longevity of the Joseon dynasty. As mentioned in the first lecture, from the inception of the Joseon dynasty, the observance of Confucian rituals was a crucial component of the Joseon dynastic rule. The reason being that upholding proprietors' ritual behavior, called ye in Korean, was believed to be essential to the creation of Confucian society in harmony with the universe. Ye was propagated through the observance of the four family rites, sade, capping, wedding, mourning, and ancestor worship. Also important were the 5 state rites: rites for ancestral worship and sacrifices, festive rites such as accession to the throne and royal marriages, reception rites for welcoming foreign emissaries, military rites for successful campaigns, and auspicious rites for mourning. Since their correct execution was of utmost significance, ritual texts were published, which included explanatory diagrams and drawings of ritual vessels and other essential artifacts used during such rites. We will return to this topic in the next lecture. In his performance of these rites, the king presented himself as a model Confucian who led by example, encouraging his subjects to follow suit. The capping ceremony was one of the most important rituals involving the soon-to-be king, as it was the first ritual held for him since his birth. Capping is a coming-of-age ceremony that marks the onset of adulthood for boys and girls. The ceremony, which at the court belonged to the category of celebratory rites, included among the 5 state rites of the Joseon dynasty, was held around the year when the crown prince turned 10. This illustrated album of a coming-of-age ceremony for the crown prince depicts in detail the sequence of events from the royal command to the preparation of the capping ceremony itself and the celebrations following the event. It has 13 illustrations, each painted over 2 pages, that in full color capture the palatial setting of the ceremony. In the detail you see here, the king is seated in the main hall, ordering his subjects and assistants to hold the capping ceremony. Outside the hall are guards and court officials dressed in formal court robes. Notice the different colored dress and their hats. The officials standing at the front on either side of the central pathway are wearing the red jobok, which was the most formal and splendid attire for high-ranking officials. They wore this costume at special events, including New Year's Day, on the promulgation of royal edicts, and other events. It was made of red silk, with the cuffs, neck, and hemlines marked in black silk. The painting is so detailed that you can also see the embroidered panels that hang below the waist at the front and the back of the robe. The panel at the back, called husu in Korean, was embroidered with patterns of white cranes and clouds and had a light blue border. The hat that the officials wear can also be seen. In my last lecture, I mentioned that hats formed an integral part of a Yangban man's attire, whether he was at home or out in public. The men in the red jobok also wear the kumgwan, which is an official's ceremonial hat. Kumgwan means golden crown, named as such as it at the base and the back was plated with gold. In some cases, the central part of the hat was further decorated with vertical lines in gold denoting the wearer's rank. But can you see the king himself in this painting? Have a look. In the Joseon dynasty, living members of the royal family, such as the king, the queen mother, and the crown prince, were never illustrated in paintings, as this was seen to be disrespectful. Instead, they were symbolically represented through depictions of various royal insignia, emphasizing their royal status. In the album illustrating the capping ceremony, the king is symbolically visualized in the center of the upper half of the painting by means of a large red throne, at the back of which is a painting with mountains painted in green. The painting represents one of the most unique themes in Joseon court paintings, namely the screen of the 5 peaks. Around 24 of such screens are now in museum collections. The example you see here is a large screen of nearly 3.5 meters in length and 1.5 meters in height, which is now in the National Palace Museum of Korea in Seoul. It's painted in mineral colors on silk that was mounted onto 6 panels, making this a so-called 6-fold screen. The screen symbolizes the authority and dignity of the king and could therefore only be used by him. From at least the 17th century, a screen of this kind was placed behind the king's seat, also when he travelled out of the palace. Unfortunately, no explanation survives detailing the meaning of these screens. However, the 5 mountain peaks, the sun and the moon, the trees and the waterfalls, as well as the waves, probably represent the forces of heaven and nature. The dual but complementary forces of yin and yang, called and yang in Korean, are represented by the moon, and the sun, yang, while the 5 mountain peaks may signify the 5 elements. The 5 elements are earth, fire, water, wood, and metal. The 5 elements theory was imported from China and had much impact in Korea, where it was applied in ritual and secular contexts since early times. Put simply, the theory emphasizes that all elements must be in balance at all times for society to be harmonious. In Joseon too, adherence to the 5 elements theory was considered extremely important. When the king sat in front of the screen, he assumed a central place within the painterly composition, highlighting his kingly role at the center of the universe. In this way, the king demonstrated his divinely sanctioned role to maintain balance between the forces in nature, namely yin and yang, or and yang, and the 5 elements, and in doing so, he confirmed his mandate to rule, basically his right to rule. The album of the capping ceremony emphasizes the significance attached to the correct conduct of state rituals. This is further reflected in the ritual texts which were published during the Joseon dynasty. This included the large number of volumes that in Korean are termed Uigwe. Uigwe is the generic name given to a vast collection of approximately 3,895 books recording in detail the royal rituals and ceremonies of Joseon Korea. In English, they are often referred to as royal protocols. Combining text and detailed illustrations, each volume preserves the records of the superintendency, Dogam, set up temporarily to plan and carry out special state rites. These rites included investitures, coronations, weddings, banquets, the painting of royal portraits, funerals, and, of course, ancestral rites. Each volume was written either by hand or sometimes by using wood blocks. Those that were made by using wood blocks were made as copies that were held at the History Archive. Here you see a page from a large-sized volume detailing the state right recording the establishment of the Korean Empire in 1898 by King Gojong. It measures 44 centimeters in height and includes calligraphic text and hand-painted illustrations. Depicted on this page is one of the seals that were made for the new emperor. Few people are aware that an empire existed on the Korean peninsula. This may be because it was relatively short-lived, spanning only 20 years. In 1897, a year before this volume was produced, King Gojong proclaimed the Korean Empire, making him the last ruler of the Joseon Kingdom and the first emperor of the new rule. Sadly, in 1907, he was forced to abdicate when the Japanese took over the Korean peninsula, leading to their colonization of Korea in 1910. Dr. Son will talk about this in more detail in her lectures on this course. King Gojong's decision to elevate the status of the Joseon Kingdom to an empire was largely triggered by the complex geopolitical situation in East Asia in the closing decades of the 19th century, when Japan, Russia and China competed for supremacy in the region. The volume you see here meticulously documents Emperor Gojong's enthronement in October 1897. It includes extensive details such as the proclamation of the Korean Empire, a list of officials involved in the issuing of the protocol, discussions between the king and ministers on transforming the Joseon Kingdom into the Korean Empire, and the process of Emperor Gojong's ascension. As the first imperial protocol created soon after Joseon became an empire, this document is critically important, providing a thorough overview of the conditions and motivations behind the shift to an imperial state. The paintings and royal manuscripts discussed in this lecture demonstrate the significance attached to the correct observance of state-sponsored rites in the Joseon dynasty. Not only are they beautiful works of art, they are also important historical records that testify to the strength and longevity of the Joseon dynasty. In the next lecture, we will look into how the permeation of Confucian teaching led to the manufacture of unique works of art. Among them are the famous white porcelain ceramics that are now regarded as exemplars of Joseon cultural traditions.